So let us continue from where we left off in the last class. We were looking at different conservation equations. The last one that we are going to look at is the conservation of momentum statement. So first we will start with conservation of linear momentum. Okay. So like in the last class, you have a certain domain of interest. Okay, so this over here is your overall domain of interest. Okay, this is the domain of interest. So if you are doing something like deep drawing operation, then the blank is going to be your domain of interest. Now within the domain of interest, we are considering some arbitrary volume of material, okay, which is denoted by omega prime. Now the volume that we are considering is a material volume. Okay, as I told you in the last class, whenever we are doing analysis, we have the option of either considering a control volume or a material volume. Now over here I am going to use material volume approach. Now, so the subdomain has got subdomain is denoted by omega prime and its boundary is denoted by d omega prime. Now, what does the conservation of linear momentum statement say? It says that for this material volume you are considering, net external force acting on the subdomain plus net body force would be equal to the net rate of change of linear momentum of this particular material volume. Now if I am going to come up with integral statement for whatever I have written in words, what will I get? So first, net external force. So if you have a area element ds with a unit outward normal n, then let the force per unit area acting on this plane at this point be denoted by T. So what is T? T is called a traction vector. Okay, it is called traction vector. Okay, now we will come to how to actually evaluate T, but T is basically called a traction vector and it gives us force per unit area acting on a plane at a point, and force per unit area multiplied by the area ds will give us force acting on that area element ds. And if you do a surface integral, then you will get net external force acting on the volume. Then how do you get net body force? If I consider a volume element dV within the subdomain, then the body force acting on that volume element would be B times dV, where B is body force per unit volume. And once again, if I do the volume integral over the subdomain, then I am going to get the net body force acting on omega prime. And what is this whole thing equal to? The net rate of change of linear momentum. Now what is linear momentum? If I take this small volume element dV, what will be its mass? Its mass will be density multiplied by the volume dV. Now that I am going to call dm, okay, infinitesimal mass. So linear momentum is mass multiplied by velocity. So in this case, for that small volume element, its linear momentum is dm times v. And what is rate of change of linear momentum? It will be material time derivative of the linear momentum. Please remember that we are using a material volume approach. So fine. And then the net rate of change of linear momentum would be the volume integral of that. Now before we can move on, so as we can see, two integrals are volume integral and one is surface integral. So we have to convert this surface integral into a volume integral. Now to do that, you need to know a few things. What is it that you need to know? What you need to know is that traction, so force per unit area acting on a surface with area ds at position x with unit outward normal n, force per unit area is called traction vector and it is denoted by letter T. It's a vector, so I am putting 1 tilde underneath it. It's a function of the position and it's also a function of the plane on which we want to evaluate the force per unit area. So the traction vector is related to stress at that point through the relation. So the traction vector T is equal to sigma transpose times n. Okay, so this is the relation between force per unit area acting on a plane and the unit normal to that plane and stress at that particular point. So here in this particular statement, sorry, I missed something here. So sigma transpose n ds. So T is being replaced by sigma transpose n, and after that we can apply divergence theorem to convert the surface integral to volume integral. So what does the divergence theorem say? Wherever you have times n, you replace it with the divergence operator. So this becomes divergence of sigma transpose plus body force per unit volume minus density times acceleration, because material time derivative of velocity is nothing but acceleration of that particular point, okay, times dv is equal to 0. Now because this statement has to be valid for any subdomain omega prime, the integrand must be 0 at all points at all time. Okay, so we are assuming the process starts at t equals to 0. That's why all time means for any time t greater than 0. So what is the statement of linear momentum balance? It is simply divergence of sigma transpose plus body force per unit volume minus rho times acceleration is equal to 0. Now this is the statement of conservation of linear momentum. For angular momentum, I am not going to go into details really, but basically what can be said is, in absence of point couples, okay, what is a couple? If you remember, a couple C is equal to, so if you have a force system like this, okay, if you have a force system like this, now if this is F, this is also F, and the distance between these 2 points over here is L, then couple C is equal to F multiplied by L. So what do we understand by point couple? Point couple means in the limit L tending to 0, if C is in the limit L tending to 0, if C is finite, then you refer to that couple as point couple. But if L is tending to 0 and C is finite, then what does that tell you about F?
Infinite.
That F tends to infinity. Now in whatever engineering applications I have looked at till now, we never encounter point couples. So in the absence of point couples, for angular momentum balance to be satisfied, you can prove, I am not showing over here, but you can prove relatively easily that sigma must be equal to sigma transpose. That is, the stress tensor must be symmetric, and this will ensure angular momentum balance for any material, whether it's a static problem, dynamic problem, whatever is happening, it will ensure that, this statement will ensure that angular momentum balance is satisfied. So for both momentum balance equations to be satisfied, what do we need to ensure? We need to ensure that basically we need to ensure that divergence of sigma transpose plus body force per unit area minus rho times acceleration is 0 and sigma equals to sigma transpose. If you ensure these two statements, then basically the moment balance for any arbitrary volume of material would be satisfied. Once again, these are general equations. They would be valid for whether you are dealing with a solid, liquid, gas, whether you are dealing with transient, steady state, any condition, this equation would be valid. So just to summarize whatever we have derived till now, so we have been deriving constraint differential equations based on the conservation statements in 3D in a general situation. So mass balance, for mass balance to be ensured, the first equation must be valid, partial time derivative of density plus divergence of density times velocity must be equal to 0. For energy balance, minus divergence of heat flux per unit area plus minus divergence of heat flux plus heat generated per unit volume per unit time must be equal to density times specific heat times material time derivative of temperature with respect to time, linear momentum balance, angular momentum balance I just covered. So the nice thing about whatever we have derived until now is that these are generic in nature. They are not going to change from problem to problem. So these are going to be universal differential equations which will have to be satisfied in order to ensure these the said conservation laws, and they have to be valid at all points in the domain at all time. Now at all time. Now any doubts until here? Any doubts, any point you need to be clarified until here, or things are fine? Fine. So
Sir,
yeah, tell me.
that for mass balance and energy balance, sign conventions, heat flux.
So for energy balance, what was the first term? The first term was related to net heat entering the subdomain, correct? Now, when you take Q dot N, what does it tell you? N is outward normal to the subdomain. So Q dot N tells you the heat leaving the subdomain. So if you want the heat entering the subdomain, then you have to put a minus sign over there. That is the reason why you get minus divergence of Q. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Alright. Anything else? Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, in yesterday's class, we calculated derivative of temperature with time,
Right.
which is equal to partial temperature derivative with respect to time plus gradient dot velocity vector.
Right.
Sir, how does that equation come? What is the basic?
Acha. That's pretty straightforward actually. So, see, if you take temperature T, okay, now in 3D, in transient analysis, what all is it a function of? What all is it a function of? It's a function of position. So in
Position.
3D, you have three coordinates, x, y, z,
Z.
and then it's also a function of time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now we are looking at total time derivative, correct?
Yes, sir.
Total time derivative. Now what is total time derivative? So in order to get total time derivative, I have to do partial derivative with respect to each one of these variables. So I am going to use chain rule. Okay. So when I use chain rule, what will I get? I will get, so the first one I will get is simply this. Okay. So here I don't need anything, but then when I differentiate with respect to x, so what should I do? Dt by dx times what? Dx by dt, correct? Plus, I will put dot dot dot, I don't have space here. Plus you can write dt by dy times partial derivative of temperature with respect to y times dy by dt plus partial derivative of temperature with respect to z times dz dt. Now what is dx dt? This is material time derivative of position x. So what does that give me?
Velocity
That gives me velocity. In which direction?
in x.
In x direction, right? So instead of dt dx, so what can I write here? I can write times vx, correct? And
Yes.
for dt dy, I can write vy. Now what will this be equal to now? So this will be equal to dt plus, so the three terms which I have, how can I write them? I can write them as gradient of t dotted with
Velocity.
velocity. That's how you get it.
Yes. Thanks.
Any other questions?
So one more thing.
Mhm.
If suppose in case of welding,
Mhm.
there will be a moving heat source.
Okay.
So in those cases, what kind of modification will have to be made in the energy balance equation?
So, see, it depends on how you want to solve the problem. You have two options, okay? So, one option is you can take the boundary condition to be time varying. Your material is fixed and your boundary condition is changing with time. So, that is one approach. If you use that approach, then your governing differential equation is not changing and your material does not have any velocity. Okay. In the second approach, you can take your source to be fixed and you can be moving your material. Okay. In that particular case, then your differential equation will change slightly. So let us say material is moving along x direction, then in this term you are going to have this and you are also going to have a vx. Okay. So it all depends on how you want to set up your problem. Okay. Anything else? All right. If you don't have any doubts, let's continue. So when we are deriving the governing differential equations, as I told you, you have two statements which need to be satisfied within the volume. One is the conservation law and the second one is the material law. So if you look at the thermal problem, then this minus divergence of heat flux plus heat generated per unit volume equals to density times specific heat times material time derivative of temperature with respect to time. This is the energy balance statement. Now what is the material law? Material law is the Fourier law of heat conduction, which tells that heat flux is equal to minus k times gradient of temperature. Now if you take the material law and put it into this differential equation we got from conservation statement, that will give us the final governing partial differential equation for the problem. Okay. So thus for thermal analysis, what will be the final governing PDA? For that I have to replace Q with minus K gradient of temperature. When I do that, my final governing PDE will be divergence of thermal conductivity times gradient of temperature plus heat generated per unit volume is equal to density times specific heat times material time derivative of temperature with respect to time. So this will be my final governing partial differential equation. Okay, now you can see that in this final governing equation, what is the variable, what is the field variable? Field variable is the temperature. So now this is a differential equation in simply one field variable. Okay, but if you take the conservation statement, so if you take this statement, how many field variables do you have?
2.
You have two of them. Okay, so just using the conservation statement you cannot solve a problem. All right, you need to know something about the material law. And another way to think about it is, so if I am looking at some problem, so let us say, once again let us take that processor and heat sink problem. You cannot get the temperature distribution within the material unless you know what is the heat sink made of. So if it is made of copper, you will have one sort of a temperature distribution. If it is made of aluminum, it will have something. If it is made of stainless steel, it will behave in one way. Okay, so the final result is going to depend, of course, also on the material law. Alright, so you cannot solve problems by only using the differential equation obtained from conservation statement. You will also have to incorporate the material model into that in order to get your final differential equation in one field variable. Now, just out of curiosity, so what will be the difference? So if I am looking at some steady state temperature distribution in the heat sink, what will be the difference between the temperature distribution for a heat sink made out of copper and for a heat sink made out of stainless steel? Anyone? So what is the difference? What material properties of relevance in steady state?
Thermal conductivity.
So among all parameters, only thermal conductivity is relevant. Density, specific heat do not matter when we are doing steady state analysis. Okay, what happens in steady state? Temperature is not changing with time. Okay, so this material time derivative of temperature will be 0. So consequently, if this is 0, the only material property of relevance is thermal conductivity. So out of copper and stainless steel, which one has higher thermal conductivity?
Copper.
Copper. Can anyone tell me without googling as to what is the thermal conductivity of copper and stainless steel? Rough numbers. Without looking into Google, can you tell me what is the thermal conductivity of copper and stainless steel? Take a guess.
5,000.
No, no. For iron, it is about 50 watt per meter Kelvin. For copper, it is about 400 watt per meter Kelvin. Aluminium, it is about 170. For stainless steel, it is about 15. Okay. So copper has got nearly 20 to 25 times higher thermal conductivity as compared to stainless steel, and it has about 2 times higher thermal conductivity as compared to copper, aluminium, and about 8 times higher thermal conductivity as compared to steel. See, some base among the materials we use in engineering products, what are the most commonly used materials?
Steel, copper for electrical wires and electrical equipment.
And aluminium. Okay, so the three most widely used materials for engineering components are, first is steel. Okay, steel is like the Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli. Okay, means pretty much by default that is the material which is going to go into a product. Now after steel, for structural purposes, the next most commonly used material is aluminium. The copper is mainly used wherever thermal conductivity or electrical conductivity is going to play a very important role. But these are the three main materials. There are a lot of other materials, but they come in niche applications. But these are the most widely used ones, and it is important that you know the thermomechanical properties, density, melting point of these materials. They come in handy all the time. So it's good to know the numbers associated. So now tell me, if copper is going to have a thermal conductivity about 25 times higher than stainless steel, what will be the difference in the temperature profiles for copper and for stainless steel when it comes to the heat sink? If I am yeah,
For copper, there will be very less temperature difference. Gradient will be very less.
okay, and for
Steel, it will be more.
stainless steel, okay. So whenever you are using high thermal conductivity materials, the thermal gradients will be small, and also the net set of temperatures will also be yeah, they will also be small, okay. So the thermal gradients are going to be small when it comes to high thermal conductivity materials. All right.
Sir,
Yeah.
but that will depend on what type of boundary conditions we are putting. If all of the boundary conditions are temperature, then the temperature profile will be same.
No, that's why I said heat sink, right? It's not the temperature boundary condition, it is heat flux condition. So on one side you are inputting heat, and on the other side you are taking it out, okay. So if you are able to conduct heat quickly through the material, and then in that particular case you will see that the resulting temperatures will be lower within the heat sink and also the processor. And see, whenever you are in doubt, you can look at limiting cases, okay. If thermal conductivity tends to 0, then what will happen?
Higher
High
resistance.
thermal gradient.
No, 0 is extreme case, na? In the limit of thermal conductivity tending to 0, what will happen? Heat does not diffuse within the material, so what will happen? The processor, whatever heat it is generating, it will be absorbed by the processor itself. So what will happen to processor temperature? It will continue rising, okay. It will rise quite a bit. Now if you have extremely high thermal conductivity material, what will happen? Whatever you are generating, it will immediately be soaked up by the heat sink, and it will diffuse it within the heat sink, and finally, of course, the final temperature will depend on your convective heat transfer coefficient, but anyhow the temperatures will be lower in general when your thermal conductivity is higher. All right. Now, until now, we were looking at differential equations in a general setting. We did not make any simplification, any assumptions until now. Now, in general, what happens is we always try to simplify the problems. Okay. So, there are two kinds of simplifications that we normally look at. One simplification has got to do with the dimensionality of the problem, okay. So what you want to do is you want to go from 3D, okay, you want to go to either 2D or you want to go to 1D. What does D stand for? Dimension, okay. So you want to reduce the dimensionality of the problem. We will look at what it means, but if at all you can reduce it to 1D, that is the best, okay. Higher the dimensionality, the more the complexity of the problem. Now, how do you reduce dimensionality? What does it mean really? What it means is, within the problem, the solution has certain pattern, means it has certain symmetry. So for example, if for example, let us say I have a plate, I have a thin plate, okay. Now in the thin plate, so let us say that somewhere I am inputting the heat, okay. So over here I am inputting some heat flux, okay, Q, and I am looking at how the temperature evolves within the plate. Now if the thickness of the plate is small, then what can I assume about the temperature distribution?
It does not vary along the thickness.
So if the thickness of the plate is small, then I can assume that my temperature is going to depend only on x and y, and it will not depend on z, okay. So this is one situation where I can reduce my problem to a 2D problem. So temperature is only a function of x and y and time. What does 1D mean? So instead of this, so let us say instead of a plate, I was actually dealing with a rod, okay. So let's say I have a rod of constant section, okay, and I have a rod of constant section and I am inputting, so let us say I am looking at some t equals to t0 and I am imposing, let us say t equals to TL, okay, and I am insulating the other surfaces. So and let us say this direction over here is the x direction. So here what can I assume about the temperature?
In the azimuthal direction, it will not change.
So I can assume that T would be only a function of
R.
x, okay, only a function of x. So only along means the boundary conditions, the domain, everything is such that the temperature in this problem is only varying as a function of x.
Sir,
So
either a cylinder or a slab type of thing.
would not matter, means would not matter as long as the variation is only in x. I am saying it's a function of x comma t. Fine, take it to be a circular rod if you need some concreteness. Okay, so it's only a function of x. So this is one way to reduce the complexity of the problem, which is to basically based on the geometry and boundary conditions say that solution only depends on either something like xy coordinates or only x. You have reduced number of spatial variables within the problem. So for example, if it depends only on x, then what will the PDE become? So that divergence of k times gradient will then become temperature only depends on x, right? So you don't have dt dy, dt dz terms, and you will finally end up with d by dx of k times dt by dx plus g equals to rho c dt by dt, okay. Now here I am assuming rectangular Cartesian system. You may also have a problem where you have radial symmetry, let's say in spherical coordinates, okay. So t is a function of r comma t, where r is the radial distance in spherical coordinates. In that particular case, then okay, then the differential equation becomes like this. So one way to simplify the problem is to reduce the dimensionality of the problem. You assume variation of the variable in let's say only one direction or two directions. Alright, that's one way to reduce the complexity. What is the second way? The second way is, in general, when you are looking at a PDE, okay, in general when you are looking at a PDE, you have derivatives with respect to time and derivatives with respect to position. Now if you are looking at steady state analysis, then what will happen? Then you do not have variation with respect to position, So that also simplifies the equation. So once again you come to the thermal analysis, what will happen, that material time derivative with for the temperature, it goes to 0 over here. Okay, so what is the simplest setting then? What is the simplest setting you can have? I said in space you can reduce the dimensionality. That is one way to reduce the complexity. And in time, you can either be looking at steady state where things are not varying with respect to time, or you could be looking at transient where they do vary with respect to time. So what is the simplest kind of a setting that we can consider?
1D steady state.
1D steady state. Okay, so one dimensional steady state analysis is the simplest setting that you can consider, and that is where we are going to start in order to find approximate solutions to governing differential equations. Okay, fine. So again, any doubts until here? All right. So until this point, I have been talking about the origin of the governing differential equations. Okay, so where do they come from? They come, we get the governing differential equations by imposing the conservation laws and the material laws. Okay, and fine. Now once you know that okay, these are the differential equations which need to be satisfied in this domain, and these are the boundary conditions and initial conditions, then how do you go about coming up with a solution to the problem? So until now we have worried about how to formulate a problem, how to pose a problem. From now on we will be talking about how to solve problems. Okay, now for some very simple situations you might be able to get analytical solutions to problems. There are a few particularly in 1D, and in some very special cases in 2D you can actually get some analytical solutions if you are looking only at thermal analysis or only mechanics and that. But if you take any complex real life components, you take the heat sink, engine block, a turbine blade, okay, you take any real life component, the geometry is so complicated and boundary conditions are also many times complex that it's not possible to get exact solutions to problems. Then in that case we have to find some approximate solutions. So now we are going to talk about some methods which we can use to get these approximate solutions, and the methods that we will be talking about now are called variational methods. Okay, you be a little patient, it will take a little bit of time in order to explain things. We will look at them bit by bit. Alright, so first let us start. So consider the problem of solving the differential equation. So this is the differential equation. So what dimension and what condition is this? This is 1D steady state. Okay, this could be a problem depending on what is U. If U is temperature, then it's a 1D thermal analysis. If U is let us say displacement, then it could be a problem in linear elasticity in one dimension. So depending on what is U, the setting can change, but fine, this is the governing differential equation that we are going to solve. And what is the domain of analysis? It is going from 0 to L. When we are looking at differential equations, would the boundary points be included within the domain, or would the boundary points be excluded? When we are looking at the governing differential equation, would the boundary points be included or excluded in the region where the differential equation has to be satisfied?
It should be included.
Anyone? Any other opinion?
Sir, because the boundary conditions are what we have imposed on the system, so they may not be satisfied, or they should not be included.
So when we are talking about differential equations, the boundaries are actually excluded. So if you look as to what is the region in which this has to be valid, it is x going from 0 to L without including 0 and L. Okay. Now why is it? Because the differential equations are derived for volume of material, not point, for volume of material. Okay, so you have to go inside the domain in order to find volume of material. That is looking at it in a physical fashion. Mathematically, the derivatives are not defined on the boundary. Okay, there is a space, means the field variable exists, whether it is temperature, whether it is displacement, it exists only within the volume and on the boundary. It does not exist outside the boundary, which means that the derivative actually does not exist on the boundary. It exists only within the volume of the material. Okay, it's a small technical point, but I just wanted to clarify. So this differential equation has to be satisfied inside the domain, and on the boundary, what are we enforcing? That at 0 u must be u0, and at L a times du by dx would be equal to q naught. Okay, so once again, if it is thermal analysis, you are imposing temperature at 0 and you are imposing heat flux at L. If it is mechanics, you are imposing displacement at 0 and you are imposing what at L?
Flux type of condition.
Not flux. For mechanics it would be force, or
In mechanics.
it would be force. Okay, force or stress. So okay, so this is the problem we want to solve. So we want to find, so what is it that we want to solve for? When I say I want to solve this problem, what do I want to solve exactly for?
A of x.
I want to solve for u of x. Okay, now what should the solution satisfy?
The
Differential equation.
governing equation and
So
boundary condition.
it has to satisfy the governing differential equation, which is minus d by dx of a du by dx plus cu equals to f. It has to satisfy that. Where all should it satisfy? It should satisfy at all points within the domain, and it should also satisfy the boundary conditions, which is u at 0 is u0 and a du by dx at L is q0. Okay, so I want to find a u which satisfies the differential equation and the boundary conditions. Now, this particular statement is called a strong form, okay, of equation. Now how many, see, whenever all of you have been exposed to linear algebra, right? Now in linear algebra, when you have some equations and some unknowns, okay, normally okay, number of equations must match with number of unknowns, and all the equations must be linearly independent in order to find a unique solution to the unknowns, correct? Now based on that understanding, how many unknowns and how many equations do we have over here?
One unknown, one equation.
If you think of it as a function, then you have one unknown. If you, okay, but in reality, how many unknowns and how many equations do you have? this equation can be evaluated at infinite points within the domain, and you need the solution u at infinite points within the domain. So you have infinite equations and infinite number of unknowns to solve for, correct? If I, instead of thinking of my unknown as a function, some analytical function, if I think of it as some solution at different points in space, then I have infinite unknowns and infinite number of equations. So in a general case, you can't solve for infinite number of unknowns. You have to somehow reduce the number of unknowns to a finite number and a small number so that you can solve for it. Okay. So let us see as to what do we do in these variational methods. Okay, so I am going to introduce a few terms now. Nothing fancy, but yeah, so please pay attention. First, I am going to introduce something called a residual. Okay, now what is residual? I have this governing equation. If I bring all terms to the left hand side, okay, then and I am going to call the left hand side then as the residual. For exact solution, what should the residual be?
0.
So if I define R as minus d by dx of a du by dx plus cu minus f, then for exact solution R would be equal to 0 for all points within the domain. Okay. Now in general we cannot get exact solutions to problems, so we cannot enforce the residual to be 0 at all points within the domain. So if we cannot enforce residual to be 0 at all points, then what is it that we are going to enforce? So for that we come to the next statement, next term, which is called weighted integral. Okay. Now what is the weighted integral? Weighted integral means, so instead of trying to satisfy R to be 0 at all points, what I will satisfy is I will multiply R with a weight function w of x. I will come to what weight function is in a minute, some physical meaning of that in a minute, but for now just focus on the mathematical part of things. So I am going to multiply the residual with a weight function and then say that integral of this product over the domain must be equal to 0 for a set of weight functions. Okay. So instead of saying that residual would be 0 at all points, in weighted integral methods what we are going to enforce is this weighted integral statement would be satisfied. Okay. Weighted integral would be enforced to be 0 for a set of weight functions. Okay. That's what we are going to do in the weighted integral method. Now after this, so in the variational methods we are either going to work with weighted integral or we are going to work with something called a weak form. Okay. Now what is weak form? So we take the weighted integral statement, okay, and then we are going to do integration by parts. Now if you look at the governing differential equations, okay, what is the highest order spatial derivative you have? Second order. Okay. So you would see that in majority of the problems that you are going to solve, the highest order spatial derivative is going to be 2. So what we are going to do is we will use integration by parts to ensure that the highest order derivative becomes half of whatever it was originally. So originally if it is 2, then in the weak form we will end up with highest order derivative of 1. If the highest order derivative was 4, then in the weak form we are going to ensure that the highest order derivative is 2. So how do we do it? So what is weak form, how do you do integration by parts? So let us say that once again you are looking only at 1D. So if I have d by dx of f times g, both are functions, f of x, g of x, dx, evaluated integral 0 to L, what will this be? This will be integral 0 to L f into g dash of into dx plus integral 0 to L f dash g dx, correct? So now if I take the terms onto the other side, okay, so let us say, so integral 0 to L f into g dash dx will be what? It will be minus integral 0 to L f dash g dx plus, what will this integral be? What will this integral be? Anybody? It's d by dx of f of g dx. So what is the integral? Forget 0 to L, but what is the integral of d by dx of f g dx?
F into G.
F into g, right? If it's a smooth function, then that integral is simply f into g. So f into g is being evaluated at what points? F into g evaluated at 0 and L. So when you want to do, if you want to transfer the derivative from g to f, what should you do? First you get a minus sign when you do the transfer, and then you evaluate the product fg at 0 and L, okay. So let us do this for the differential equation we have, then doing integration by parts, okay. So doing integration by parts, what will happen? I actually originally had weight function w into minus d by dx of a into du by dx, right? So when I transfer the derivative, the minus vanishes during integration by parts, and then I end up with a dw by dx into a du by dx. Other terms remain unchanged. This will be plus c times w times u minus f times w dx. And what will be the boundary term? It will be w into minus a du by dx evaluated at 0 and L. This is what I am going to get when I do integration by parts. Now after this, I am going to substitute the boundary conditions into the boundary terms. What at L it is straightforward, right? QL, sorry, a into du by dx at x equal to L is QL. Okay, if you look at boundary conditions, sorry, it is Q naught. A into du by dx at x equal to L is Q naught. Okay, let me change this. This is going to be Q naught, and at 0 w, the weight function at x equal to 0 is taken as 0. Now this is, you might be wondering why this would be the case. Wait for 2 minutes, it will become clear. Okay, so we are saying w at 0 should be equal to 0, and if you impose those boundary conditions, what do you end up with? The boundary term finally simplifies to w at 0, q at 0 times w at L. This thing must be equal to 0. Now this statement is called the weak form statement. Weak form statement. Sorry. This is called the weak form statement. So in the weak form statement, we are actually incorporating the boundary conditions, okay. Now coming to why is it that w at 0 is taken to be equal to 0. So what we are going to do is to give a physical sense to whatever we are doing. In the weighted integral and weak form statement, w, weight function, is taken to have the interpretation of admissible variation in u. Okay, it is taken to have the interpretation of admissible variation in u. So W is defined as variation in U. So if we do this, then we can show that W will be 0 wherever U is prescribed. Now, how many of you are familiar with is any one of you, are you familiar with what is variation of a function? Okay, yeah. Okay, so now let us say uh, okay, just give me a second. Okay, let us say that u of x is the exact solution to the problem. Okay, so u is a function of x. At x equal to 0, it is actually equal to some u0. Okay, so this is x equal to 0 to x equal to L. All right. Now at 0, u is being prescribed. Now, so when you are looking at possible solutions to the problem, okay, you are saying that whatever possible solution you are considering, it is going to be an admissible variation in u. What does it mean? So any possible solution has to satisfy the condition that u is equal to u0 at x equal to 0. Okay, so let us say the green curve and the purple curve are possible candidates for the solution. So for any possible candidate at x, the value of the possible function is going to be u plus variation in u. So first thing to consider is that variation in u is basically a function. It is not really a single scalar value, but rather it's a function. And second thing is, so at x equal to 0, what will be variation in u?
Delta U 0.
So variation in u denoted by delta u. So variation in u at 0 will be basically 0. Why? Because for any admissible function, the admissible function should also satisfy what are known as essential boundary conditions. Okay, so the prescription of u means any possibility also must satisfy that at x equal to 0 the value of that function is u0. So automatically variation in u would be 0 in the place where the boundary condition is prescribed. Okay, now is prescribed. So in this particular weak form statement and weighted integral statement, the weight function is taken to have the interpretation of variation of u. Okay, now variation of u, and so in this context we define two kinds of variables. Okay, so variables are taken to be of two types. Okay, what are they? So one is called primary and second one is called secondary. Okay, so now primary variable is the one whose variation we are going to consider, and also like the differential equation is actually in terms of the primary variables. So if you are looking at thermal analysis, then the primary variable will be temperature. If you are looking at mechanics, solid mechanics, what will be the primary variable? Displacement. If you are looking at fluid mechanics, what will be the primary variable? Velocity. Okay. If you are looking at electrostatics, what will be the primary variable?
ENM fields.
So this will be the potential. Okay, electrostatic potential. If you are looking at electrical analysis where currents are involved, current would be the primary variable. So primary variable is basically the field variable, okay, in terms of which which is going to appear in the final governing differential equation. Okay, now secondary variable, now in the weak form statement, if you look at the boundary terms, okay, so what is the boundary term in the weak form statement? This is the boundary term in the weak form statement, right? Now you have weight function and you have something multiplying the weight function. Okay, now in the weight function term, if you replace w with the if you replace w with the or so if you replace w with u, whatever you are going to get will be the primary variable. Okay, so here w is basically nothing but variation of u. So u is defined as the primary variable. Okay, now let's say the boundary term, instead of u, the boundary term had du by dx. Okay, so if you replace w with u, what will you get? Du by, so you will get variation of du by dx. So primary variable will be du by dx in that particular case. So in order to identify primary and secondary variables, you have to look at the boundary terms in the weak form statement. Okay, so you take whatever terms are involving w, you okay, you replace w with u, what you get will be the primary variable. Now whatever is multiplying the term involving w, that will be the secondary variable. Okay, so in here a into du by dx, okay, a into du by dx, which is basically defined as q, is the secondary variable, variable. Okay, now is the secondary variable. So secondary variable, now so if in thermal analysis, what will be the secondary variable? In thermal analysis, what will be the secondary variable?
Heat flux.
It will be the heat flux. More precisely, it will actually be the normal heat flux. Okay, so it will be Qn. In mechanics, what will it be? In mechanics, what will it be?
Stress.
It will be force. It won't be stress. It will actually be force. It won't be stress. Okay, so it will be in 1D it is simply force. So it is going to be actually tractions. Okay, fine. So you can identify this only from the boundary term in the weak form statement. Now the boundary conditions that you have okay, are divided into two categories. The boundary conditions are put into two conditions. One is called essential boundary condition, essential boundary condition, and another is called natural boundary condition, natural boundary condition. So essential boundary conditions are boundary conditions where basically primary variable is prescribed. Primary variable is prescribed. Okay, and natural boundary condition is the one where secondary variable is prescribed. Secondary variable is prescribed. Okay, now one point to note is the natural boundary condition enters the weak form statement. Okay, so we have this a du by dx at x equal to L, we are replacing it with q naught. Okay, so point to note is natural boundary condition enters weak form statement, enters weak form. Okay, now enters weak form. Now in this particular problem, what do we have at x equal to 0? What kind of boundary condition do we have at x equal to 0, and what kind of boundary condition do we have at x equal to L? What kind of boundary condition do we have at x equal to 0, and what kind of boundary condition do we have at x equal to L?
A natural boundary condition at x equal to L.
Okay, and at 0?
Essential.
At 0 is essential. Okay, now there is one more very important point as far as boundary conditions are concerned, that they are mutually exclusive. Okay, so one very important point to note is natural and associated natural and associated essential boundary conditions are mutually exclusive. What does mutual exclusivity mean? What do you think it means? Mutual exclusivity?
It not depend one another.
No.
Occurrence of one excludes the occurrence of other.
Exactly. So occurrence of one excludes the occurrence of others. So either you impose temperature or you impose normal heat flux at any point on the boundary. You cannot impose both. Okay, in thermal analysis, this is a very, very important point, that on the boundary in finite element analysis, you either impose the essential boundary condition, which is imposing the primary variable, or you impose the natural boundary condition, which is imposing the associated secondary variable. Okay, so in thermal analysis on the boundary, you are either prescribing normal heat flux, or you are prescribing, or you should be prescribing temperature. In mechanics, you will either be prescribing displacements on the boundary, or you will be prescribing normal heat flux. Or you will be prescribing surface tractions. Okay, so they are mutually exclusive. You cannot prescribe both at the same point on the boundary. Okay. Any questions until here? I know it's a lot of new concepts.
That means that natural convection type problems cannot be solved using finite element.
No, you can solve using finite element method. So
Because
okay,
that requires mixed boundary conditions, convection surface.
yes, that involves mixed boundary conditions. You can solve it. Now, whatever I have just said is the general guiding principle. Okay, this is what needs to be ensured whenever the governing equations comes from some minimization or maximization statement. Uh, what I so if you take linear elasticity and solid mechanics, you know that in steady state, whatever is the displacement field solution to your problem, it minimizes the potential energy of the system. Do all of you know this or not?
Yes, sir.
So whenever the solution to a problem minimizes or maximizes a functional, okay, like minimization of potential energy, then whatever I have just said needs to be satisfied. Okay, if it is not satisfied, then basically we cannot cast the problem as a minimization or a maximization problem. Now, many of the current day solvers use this minimization maximization thing in order to solve problems. If this is not satisfied, okay, that you are not enforcing what do you say, see, the thermal flux condition, okay, what you have is actually a heat flux condition only. You are not really imposing temperature over there, but it's not a conventional or a constant heat flux condition, but rather heat flux depends on the temperature at that particular point. So the convective problem will not have a you cannot pose it as a minimization or a maximization problem. Okay, but if you were to be imposing only primary or secondary variables on the boundary, then you can pose it in that manner. The more important thing I wanted to convey was that, so for example, you are not saying that temperature must be this and heat flux must be this. That's not the convective boundary condition. It's a single statement which relates the heat flux to the temperature at that particular point. You are neither imposing primary nor you are imposing secondary boundary condition. You are correct, you are imposing a mixed boundary condition over there, but it is still a single constraint that you are imposing over there. Did I answer your question? So 2 points. So one is you can have only one constraint equation. Okay, so if that one constraint is either primary is something or secondary is something, then you can pose your problem, then there is a possibility that you can pose your problem as a minimization or maximization problem. Otherwise you cannot pose it in that manner. If you impose a mixed one, meaning primary plus secondary something equals to something, if it is still a single constraint equation, it is okay, you can solve the problem, but not as a minimization or maximization problem.
Yes, sir.
Any questions, doubts? There must be a lot you do not understand over here. I have a lot of time, so you can ask. Okay, so you understand things. All right, so let me fine, I'll stop the video.